What if Napoleon didn't fail? What if Napoleon managed to win the Napoleonic Wars? What if he managed to conquer Europe? But first, before we get into how we could make Napoleon win, we need to talk about a series of events and conflicts that devastated the entirety of Europe and created the conditions that gave rise to Napoleon. Case in point, the French Revolution. The year is 1789. France was divided into three castes, or estates. The first estate was the clergy, priests, monks and nuns. The second estate was the nobility, the rich and powerful. And then there was the third estate, everyone else. But here's the problem. The first two estates had all the power, while the third paid all the taxes. France was broke and desperate for money. So, who do you think had to pay the price? The rich nobles who paid almost no taxes, or the poor commoners who were already struggling to survive? Yeah, I'm sorry bro, we're going to need that pig to pay off the debt. But what about that golden carriage you came in? Bro thinks poverty is a team sport. Give me that pig. Pair that with the fact that a severe winter and crop failure hit during the same time inevitably led to revolution. In short, the third estate figures out they should be the ones ruling the country. They take control, lock up the king, and created the French Republic. But then, they get paranoid. What if the king decides to take control of the country again? And then, they start killing. The king, guillotined. The queen, guillotined. Leaders from the third estate that helped create the revolution, guillotined. What? Yeah, there was a bunch of infighting between the different factions of the third estate. So basically, nobody knew what the f was going on. Let's look at what the other nations of Europe's reactions were. So, everyone here is a monarchy, right? Yep, yeah. Does anybody know what's going on in France? I want to kill all of your kings. Then, a series of wars start, with Napoleon rising quickly through the ranks and winning battle after battle, even outnumbered and outgunned. He quickly became a hero to the French and totally didn't abuse his newfound power and fame. Right? Right? Bro instantly overthrew the government, then became a dictator. A couple of successful wars later, and we arrive at the date of 1807, the end of the Fourth Coalition. For some historical context, Napoleon has just crushed Austria and Russia at Austerlitz. Britain destroyed his and Spain's navy at the Battle of Trafalgar, and Russia officially allied with France and joined the continental system. Some consider this the peak of Napoleon's empire. After this, he made two fatal mistakes. One, he invaded his close ally Spain, and his forces were stuck in a guerrilla war inside of the Iberian Peninsula. And two, he invaded Russia, where attrition, winter, and scorched earth tactics destroyed his army, which eventually led to his downfall. Now, what could Napoleon do to prevent all of that and win the Napoleonic Wars? Well, he was in a pretty precarious situation. Britain was a thorn in his side and looked for every opportunity to defeat him. And since the entire French navy was defeated at Trafalgar, there wasn't much he could do. Napoleon opted to create the continental system, which was basically a blockade on Britain. So, nobody who was in the continental system would be able to trade with them. Who was in the continental system? France, its puppet states, and all the countries that Napoleon managed to defeat in the coalition war so far. Now, this system wasn't perfect, as Russia would later start to secretly trade with the British. That eventually led to Napoleon finding out, getting angry and invading Russia. So then again, what could he do? I believe there is one change that needs to be made which allows Napoleon to remain in power and win. His invasion of Spain. Napoleon didn't like the Spanish leaders at all. He thought they were weak and couldn't run the country properly. In real history, he invaded Spain and made his brother Joseph Bonaparte the new king. The Spanish people were very angry about this, and they fought back with guerrilla warfare, which caused Napoleon a huge headache for years. But there was another option. the king's son Ferdinand, who was popular with the Spanish people. Everyone trusted him and liked him. If Napoleon had made Ferdinand the king instead of putting his brother on the throne, the Spanish people might have accepted French influence more easily. At that time, Spain was in chaos. The old king Charles IV was weak, and his minister Godoy was very unpopular. The people didn't trust them, and the country was full of anger. By putting Ferdinand on the throne, Napoleon could have kept the Spanish happy enough to avoid a full-scale rebellion, while still controlling the country behind the scenes. With the Peninsular War out of the way, the War of the Fifth Coalition never happens. Or just not as we think of it. The reason the Fifth Coalition War against Napoleon began was primarily because they saw the French army being bogged down fighting in Spain. Since the Peninsular War never began in this timeline, it is fair to assume that Austria wouldn't be trying anything against the French. Napoleon's ambition, however, wouldn't stop here, and he would set his sights for the next targets. Since Napoleon and Russia are still allies, I believe he could convince the Russians to split up Austria and later the Balkans between themselves. After all, Russia longed after territories and influence in the Balkans. But at the same time, it is quite possible that Russia would be wary of Napoleon's increasing power and refuse. But Napoleon's empire would be at its peak right now, and Austria would be at its lowest. Russia would see real expansion without any risk. So, after a swift Russo-French invasion, the Austrian Empire is no more. The country is carved out and split in zones of influence. Galicia would be split between Poland and Russia, Napoleon would reorganize the Confederation of the Rhine into the German Confederation, with Austria proper being incorporated into it. The rest of the empire would become puppet states. Bohemia and Hungary under Napoleon, while Transylvania would go to Russia. Next on the chopping block, the Ottoman Empire. While the Ottomans are regarded today as a weak empire in its later years, the Ottoman Empire during the Napoleonic Wars was still a force to be reckoned with. So, I don't expect a total partition as with Austria, but with French troops advancing from the Croatian coast, Russian troops crossing the Danube into Bulgarian territories, and Orthodox peasants all over the empire awaiting liberation from the Ottoman yoke, I don't think the Otto Bros can win this one. After a campaign that would last around 2 years, the Ottomans would be forced to concede and sign a peace treaty, with them having to renounce much of the Balkans and keeping a foothold in southern Bulgaria and Constantinople. Partitioning wise, I think that Russia would be keen on having influence in all of the Orthodox nations of the Balkans, while Napoleon would like more of the Balkan coast and even having Greece as a satellite state, to limit British and Ottoman influence in the Mediterranean. This would cause a rift between the French and the Russians. Napoleon, of course, wouldn't listen to Russian demands and would annex his interests. Russia would instead gain Bulgaria, Serbia and Montenegro. The friendship between Russia and France would be pretty much over by this point, and Russia, like in our timeline, would start secretly trading with Britain. Napoleon would find about this and would be livid. Even after giving them so much land, he would still betrayed. He would officially declare war on the Russian Empire, but the outcome would be different. In real life, Napoleon gathered 500,000 men and marched straight to Moscow. He lost his entire army along the way due to attrition and winter. But in this timeline, his southern flank was now exposed to Russian puppet states and even maybe an Ottoman entry into the war to retake Greece. Due to this risk, I don't think Napoleon would risk it all and go straight for Moscow. Instead, he would conquer territories in western Russia and expand his Polish puppet state, eventually recreating the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Then, he would start another campaign in the Balkans to cut off the Russian influence there. But here he would face the most resistance. Serbians and Bulgarians, having only recently been liberated from the Ottomans, would completely oppose Napoleon. Guerrilla and attrition warfare would bog down Napoleon's forces, eventually forcing him to sue for peace and end the war. With this conflict over, I believe the Napoleonic Wars would come to a halt. Napoleon would realize there is nothing much he could do against the British, and he more or less limited the Russian influence in Europe. He would focus on governing his vast empire, reforms across the board in his puppet states, rewriting constitutions, and reorganizing the continental system. I think he would be a good ruler, and overall improve the quality of life across Europe, focusing more on meritocracy and trying to stamp out corruption. But inevitably, Napoleon would still die at the age of 51 due to stomach cancer, the same reason why his father died as well. Oh man, I feel so sad that Napoleon just died. I wish there was a Discord server where people who enjoy alternate history would meet and talk about, alternate history. Well, you're in luck, kid, as I have just launched my very own Discord server. Link in the description. Anyways, back to the video. So, where does that leave the empire? Napoleon II. No doubt, Napoleon would have made some preparations for his heir before death. The 10-year-old Napoleon II had no way of ruling the empire his father left him, as he was, a kid. So, more than likely, Napoleon's brother, Joseph, would be acting as regent and taking control of the empire until the successor would get older. The question now is, could Joseph hold the empire together? Yeah, no, not really. Joseph was a pretty interesting historical figure. He was certainly capable and a good administrator. When he ruled Naples, he actually did a really good job. He ended all the unfair laws that kept peasants tied to the land, made everyone equal under the law, improved schools, and built new roads to help trade. He even tried to make taxes fairer and got rid of the Inquisition in Spain. Basically, Joseph wanted to modernize and make people's lives better. But Joseph had one big problem. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't really understand how to lead an army, and most of Napoleon's generals knew it. They didn't respect him because he didn't fight on the battlefield like they did. When he was made king of Spain, famous French marshals like Soult and Suchet often ignored his orders and did their own thing. Joseph wanted to focus more on ruling, but the generals only cared about fighting and glory. So, what do you think those ambitious marshals that didn't respect him would do once he was in charge of everything? It wouldn't be pretty. Now, I'm not suggesting that they would split the empire Alexander the Great style. I believe they would respect Napoleon II's right to the throne and still be loyal. But they for sure wouldn't listen to the orders from Joseph. This results in a central government unable to plan military actions against possible enemies, thus leaving the fate of France up to the most powerful marshals. From an outside perspective, this would make France look very weak, especially compared to the authority that Napoleon had. Prussia would be eager to retake its lost lands, Britain would probably focus even more on dismantling the French Empire, and the Russian Empire, cautious at first, might start to expand its influence in the Balkans. How much till another coalition war begins? I certainly don't know. Napoleon's army was still intact in this universe and his marshals were still alive and kicking. Remember, France also won because of great commanders and soldiers, not only because of Napoleon. So they would still pose a threat, but considerably less. Eventually, news would get out that the French military high command wasn't respecting the crown, and the old enemies would start plotting. Prussia, humiliated by Napoleon's earlier victories, began quietly rebuilding its forces along the western borders. Britain, never dragged down by the Peninsular War, poured more resources in trade wars, spies, and financial support for its allies. Russia, eyeing up Poland, would make a deal with the Prussians to once again split up the Polish, as they had done before. The war starts with a lightning attack from both Russia and Prussia, meant to take down Poland early in the war, and focus on the Western Front. It's a great success, with the combined armies taking Warsaw by storm in only a few months. They then turned towards the German Confederation with all their might and smashed to the Confederation troops trying to reach the Rhine. But the French army has arrived. After a messy and disorganized mobilization, the first French troops arrived to the front. They managed to push out the coalition forces out of the Confederation and even push into Prussia proper. This would cement France as a powerful enough empire even without Napoleon as the leader. The war ends with France incorporating what's left of Prussia into the German Confederation and Poland gaining minor territories from the Russian Empire. Joseph would continue to rule the empire as regent in a relatively peaceful Europe. Nobody dares to ignite a conflict against France anymore, with the fear of losing even more territories. Napoleon II comes to power in 1830 and makes France more united than ever. After years of peace, a new idea began to spread across Europe. Nationalism. People started thinking, wait, why are we ruled by some French guy again? In the German and Italian territories, people wanted to run their own countries. They didn't see themselves as imperial subjects, but as proud Germans and Italians. Because yeah, controlling Germany and Italy in the age of nationalism, what could possibly go wrong? By the late 1840s, the nationalists would go to an all-out revolt. In Munich and Milan, students and soldiers raised their national flags and declared independence. Britain and Russia, seeing the chaos unfold, decided to help the rebels by sending them guns and gold. Europe's peace was over. The next great war was coming. The empire was in complete disarray. Russia and Britain, seeing all this unfold, decided it's time to get back to work. A coalition for the freedom of Europe is made, to liberate the European continent from the French grasp. Napoleon II assembles the army and quickly dispatches them to the Eastern Front to counter the Russian forces. But before that, one thing I need to mention. Napoleon's generals were either long dead by now or have 70 years and are in their retirement home. France's army is no longer made up of veterans and the times have changed, which put Napoleon II in a worse position than he realizes. The French army arrives in Poland expecting a simple campaign. The Russians, having studied Napoleon's tactics, are organized, disciplined and ready. The ensuing battles are a surprising loss for the French army. They are forced to retreat across German territories, where they suffer even more casualties. By the time they reach the Rhine, the army is battered, hungry and demoralized, and the perception of French invincibility is gone. The German Confederation seizes the opportunity. They declare independence, refusing to remain under French influence. Britain quickly intervenes, landing troops in northern Germany and joining forces with the German armies. This combined force begins to advance into French-held territory, aiming to push the empire back and restore what was lost. Napoleon II scrambles to organize a defense, but coordination is poor. The battles are no longer simple retreats. French forces manage to win small engagements and delay the coalition's advance in some areas, but eventually the coalition gains the upper hand. France, exhausted, surrounded, and unable to sustain its armies, is forced to surrender. The empire is cut down to size. Knowing that an united Germany could threaten the balance of powers, just like Napoleon did, Germany is split into two independent nations. The North German Confederation, with Berlin as its capital, and the Kingdom of South Germany, ruled by the Habsburgs in Vienna. Italy gains independence and is unified. The Netherlands becomes free, Poland is once again partitioned, but France manages to keep everything west of the Rhine. Napoleon II inherits a smaller, more manageable empire, but one that is a shadow of his father's conquests. Europe stabilizes, at least for now, and the era of French domination ends. This war would enrage the Germans, who fought with a dream of an independent and united Germany. A dream that was shattered by Russia and Britain. Not only that, but a large portion of the German-speaking population in the Rhine was now under the French Empire. The powder keg would be set for the next big conflict. But enough of that for now. I think we went pretty far into this alternate history scenario. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, join the Discord while it's still new, and check out my other videos. Cheers!